Alright, so to get this lifted up with the crane, we're going to need to put a chain on it. The service manual says that apparently there are lift points that go on here and on the other side of the engine. This one didn't have it when I took it out, so I don't know if that's just a model year difference or something. So I'm just going to bolt the chain in here and back there, and then we'll get it up onto the hoist. Alright, now that we've got it up on the engine crane, we're going to go ahead and get the flex plate installed. You do have to use new bolts because they're torque to yield. You can see you want to line this hole up with that other hole on the crank. Alright, these bolts all need torque down to 39 foot-pounds plus an additional 25 degrees. You can use a crank holding tool if you've got it, or you can just put a breaker bar on the bolt and have somebody else hold it, like right now. There's going to be tension on it now. Alright, the astute among you may notice that I moved my chain setup a little bit. Still got this same bolt over here. It was a little long, so I just threw some nuts on there. Not ideal, but you know, it works. I had the chain over here initially. That's how I pulled it out, and I didn't have any issues. I don't know why it was tipping this time. I must have just had it set up different. But to keep it from tipping over, so it's easier to manage, I put it over on this bus on the head. If your engine's got lift hooks, just use that. That makes it a little easier, but this works too. So let's get it over into the car and get it set in. Now you can see it's going to be a little tricky with the hood to get the clearance for the engine to go in. So I'm going to pop the lift strut off so we can get the hood back a little bit. Alright, it's pretty simple. You just use a screwdriver to pry this little clip back. Now we're going to lift up on the hood. Pull that out. It gives us a little bit more. Not much more, actually. So it may need a little bit of finagling. I'm going to go grab a block that we can shove in here to keep the hood up. Alright, I got this tuber fur holding the hood up all the way. Let's see if we can get it in now. I am also going to make sure everything is in position. I'm going to need to pull the AC compressor up and out of the way so we can get it back into where it needs to go without the engine limiting us there. And then also the axle support bracket may need adjusted. Alright, so you just want to make sure everything's out of the way. So we got this coolant line up and out. Nut hose, it should go past no problem. I'm going to flip this up like that. Other than that, we should be good. So you just want to check often that you're not running into stuff. Case in point, I didn't see that the exhaust manifold's sitting over here. Should be good there now. It's never a bad idea to have multiple people with you. Makes it easier. But it's doable alone as long as you take it slow. Tell me if you see something hanging up. There we go, the bellhousing alignment dowels are in. Now, ordinarily, obviously, the engine doesn't sit this low. It's because the transmission is sitting low, too. You can jack it up and get it level, but it worked out just fine this way. Once we get the bellhousing bolts in, we'll raise up the engine and transmission and get the front engine mount in. Here's our bellhousing bolt bag. I do need to try to remember how this thing goes. Alright, so all I'm doing right now is just getting the top bell housing bolts in. We're not torquing them down to spec yet, we're just tightening them up so that the engine and transmission can be one unit again. They're 18mm headed bolts. Alright, I've got these top two bell housing bolts snugged up. Now we can kind of get an idea of what we need to do next. Should probably clean off that AC compressor, it's pretty nasty. Next I'm going to install the front engine mount so we can get the hoist off of the engine. Both of these are pretty grimy, so I'm going to hit them real quick with the pressure washer. We first have to install this engine to motor mount bracket. According to the service manual, these get torqued to 74 foot-pounds, and they are an 18mm headed bolt. Looks like we're going to need to lift the engine and drop all the bolts out. Alright, doesn't look like the torque wrench is going to fit on these two rear bolts down here. So we're going to need to just get them good and tight. We're going to need the wrench. This may be a bracket that's better to install with the engine out, but this is what we got to do. Alright, we should be good there. Let's go grab the chassis to engine mount. Now's a good time to inspect the mount rubber. You want to check it for any major cracking or anything like that. This one looks good, but if you did have one that was severely cracking, now would be a fine time to replace it. Alright, we should be good there. Let's go grab the chassis to engine mount. Now's a good time to inspect the mount rubber. You want to check it for any major cracking or anything like that. This one looks good, but if you did have one that was severely cracking, now would be a fine time to replace it. These two nuts also get torqued to 74 foot-pounds. I'm not going to try to fit a torque wrench in there, I'll just get them real tight. These 15mm headed bolts, these are 18mm but nuts. These 15mm bolts get torqued to 37 foot-pounds. Alright, we now should be okay to go ahead and remove the tension from the engine crane. And you can see the motor's in there now. Not bad. Still got a long ways to go though. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get the bell housing bolts in. I believe this one with the studded end goes up top over here where this bolt currently is, so that you can bolt the ground strap to it. There are a couple sizes of bell housing bolts. You have these 18mm headed ones, and then there's a couple 15mm headed ones. I believe these go down below if I remember right. So I'm just going to get everything I can do from the top because I still need to actually lift the car up a little bit so I can get under it. One thing to note is that the shorter 18mm headed bolt goes into this upper hole right above the starter. Right here. Alright, so far we have these two bell housing bolts you can see there, along with two more bell housing bolts that go around the starter over here. So now I'm going to go ahead and put this ground strap onto the stud and get the nut tightened down. Alright, we got the car lifted up and supported. There's a couple things we got to take care of under here. The first thing we're going to do is get the rest of these bell housing bolts in. Now this little bracket here, I actually couldn't remember where it went, but as it turns out, it goes up in here. Just like so. Not actually entirely sure what its purpose is, but that's where it goes, so we're going to put it back. So we have these three 15mm headed bolts. They go like so, and then our last 18mm headed bolt goes way up above the axle. So I'm going to go ahead and get these tightened down and we can move on. I believe earlier I said that the shortest 18mm headed bell housing bolt goes up above the starter. I think that's actually incorrect. The longer one fits just fine up here. and I think the shorter one is required up here. Next, I'm going to take care of the axle support bearing for the passenger side axle. Now, this is definitely something you want to pay attention to before you get the engine in. You have to get this bracket positioned correctly, because if it's spun all the way down here, you're not going to be happy, because you're going to either have to pull the axle out or the engine back up and out so that you can reposition this bracket. Luckily for us, we got it positioned correctly, so it's in place, and we just need to get the 3 bolts here, here, and there installed. And these bolts are 15mm headed bolts. So next I'm going to take care of the torque converter bolts. Now what you need to do is get a wrench on the crank bolt, spin the flex plate over so that you can see one of these bolt holes, and then you got to reach around, it's kind of hard to show, and grab the torque converter, and it should turn very freely, and you just got to turn it until, just like that, you get a bolt hole to line up with the bolt hole on the flex plate. Just like that. Now these bolts you should also put some Loctite on. Definitely be careful not to drop the bolt. That would be a sad time. So for now I'm just going to snug the bolt up, and then I'm going to rotate it and install all of the bolts. I believe there's just 3 torque converter bolts. Alright, now I've got all 3 of the bolts installed. I'm going to go ahead and torque them to 46 foot-pounds. Now that we've got the torque converter bolts torqued down, I'm going to go ahead and get the starter in. You can see this thing's got a little bit of corrosion going on here, so I'm going to hit it with the wire wheel real quick. Make sure that's cleaned up before we get it back installed. Alright, we've got the starter set in place. It's held in with one 15mm bolt down here, and then there's another one up on top. While we're down here, I'm going to tighten this up, and then I'm going to save the top one to when we lower the car back down, because I can't quite reach up and around the motor, up and around the hood rather. But before we set it back down, I think we're going to take care of the exhaust. We need to raise the catalytic converter back up into place and get a nut started so we can torque it down. Alright, got the starter up and in. I went ahead and torqued down this lower bolt. There's another 15mm bolt up top, but I'm going to wait till we lower the vehicle so that I can access it a little bit easier. The last couple things we need to do down here before we can lower it is we have a couple brackets, this bracket and this bracket, that we need to get into place, and then we can lower the vehicle back down. So this aluminum one has, you can see it says 2 engine. That's helpful. Goes up on the stud. Just like that. So the steel bracket also goes onto the stud just on top of the aluminum bracket, and then it's going to bolt onto the exhaust manifold. Alright, everything should be taken care of here on the underside, so let's go ahead, lower the vehicle back down, and we can get everything up top done. Alright, unfortunately, as I was getting the wiring harness for the starter installed, I don't know if I over-tightened it, or the plastic does seem pretty brittle. You can see the case broke on the starter solenoid, so I'm going to have to get a new one of those from the junkyard. That's not a huge deal. Just have to do that before we get too far. But for now, we can keep moving on. So I think next we'll go ahead and get the AC compressor in place. It has these 3 equal length bolts. These are 13mm headed bolts. So with the AC compressor in, I think I'm going to get the dipstick in here as well. And then next we can get the alternator back in place. So it's looking like the easiest way to get the alternator in is going to be to yank this stud out, because the AC hoses prevent it from actually getting onto the stud. So I'll pull that out and see if we can get it in place. So with the stud removed, this should just go straight in place. Obviously put the stud in through there. Alright, now that we've got the alternator installed, we can go ahead and start getting this wiring harness sorted. Get this AC pressure sensor plugged in. We got the alternator wiring harness. Then you see here this spade connector is the alternator charging. wire, or positive, battery plus, whatever you want to call it. Get that snug down. Then I believe this wiring harness actually gets pushed into the hole on the dipstick here. Just like that. You can see you got this other little clip. Got the knock sensor there. That'll go to the starter, but we're probably gonna have to replace it. Not probably, we are gonna have to replace it. I believe this is the oil pressure sensor. Then way down in there, I think that's the crank sensor. You see, I'm not gonna plug it in yet because I need to actually tighten down this bellhousing bolt. Need to switch it around. You can see how it plugs in there. Next, I think we're going to turn our attention over to the thermostat housing. I'm going to go ahead and pull the thermostat out. We'll get a new seal on it. Then we can get the outlet installed. New seal's on. I did lubricate it with a touch of Dex Cool. You do want to make sure the mating surface is nice and clean. I might run some Scotch-Brite over this real quick. Got the surface cleaned up a little bit. So now we'll get this in place. This is the correct orientation, like that. It's a little tight down there. Get those bolts on and I'll just snug them down. Alright, so with that housing snug down, I did get both coolant hoses. If I can get it in frame. Did get both coolant hoses on. You can see the lower one, the larger one, goes to the radiator, obviously. And then this upper one goes to the coolant reservoir. And for this upper red hose, it looks like I'm going to need to get a new one. It was stubborn on disassembly, so I had to, get a little medieval on it. I think now I will go put the new seals on the injectors because those just came in, so let's see if we can get those on without messing them up. So here are our injectors. I ruined all of the ones that came with the head gasket set, but I'm not convinced that they were actually the correct seals for this application. They weren't really the same exact size as the OEMs. But anyways, those are the ones that are on here right now. I'm going to go ahead and cut them off. You do want to make sure these are nice and clean. I gave everything a good clean when I did the first attempt. So here's our new set. The only place I could find these for a very reasonable price was on eBay. I think these were like 25 bucks. So they look to be okay quality. See, these do come with new boots. See if we can get the old ones off. So you can see these O-rings and the black spacers are for the upper seals. I didn't take these off the rails, so I'm just going to leave them and just do the lower seals. So you can see they're just a Teflon ring, and when you slide them on, they expand, obviously, and you have to resize them or else they won't fit back down into the bore. You do need a special tool. I picked up this one off Amazon. It's kind of like a knockoff of the OEM version. It's supposed to be the right size for this application. You can see it comes with adapters for various different injectors. So what we're going to do is choose one of these installation tools that fits right. Looks like that's about right. You don't want them to be sliding over like that, because then it's going to stretch the seal out too much and make your life very difficult, as I found out last time. So we're going to place the Teflon ring onto the installation tool and the injector. This little plastic bit is used to push the seal all the way onto the injector. See, there's a little ridge inside. You don't want any lubricant to get on these, any oil or anything, because they're meant to be dry. They're Teflon. Alright, well we got it on there. Let's see if the resizer tool will work. Okay, well already we're doing better than last time. Although I may have messed up by not pushing it all the way back first. It's kind of looking like that's the case. Alright, I want to try using one of these larger ones. Hopefully this doesn't ruin it for us. Well, we got it over. Now we're going to see if we can get it resized. I'm going to squish it down first by hand. Try to get it shrunk as much as I can. Okay, so I think we're good there. Next time I'll make sure to get the rear one on first. So yeah, I'm thinking that the seals I had last time were incorrect. These one went on without much trouble. This tool seems to work pretty well, so I'll link it down below. It's way cheaper than getting the OEM tool. So I'm just going to repeat the same exact procedure on the rest of these, and then we'll get it in the car. Well, I guess we're doing the same thing as we did last time. Alright, well, that wasn't too bad at all. Hopefully they seal as well as they go on, but I'm pretty happy with them so far. I'll try to link everything in the description in case that helps somebody. So let's go get this in the car. Alrighty, so I stuck paper towels in the injector ports just to keep stuff from falling out of them. Falling into them, I guess. So obviously those need removed first. All those out. Go ahead and get the injectors back in. Fuel rail bolts get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. And if I didn't mention it before, they're 13mm headed bolts. You do want to kind of snug them down evenly. Alright, fuel rails in. Alright, next I think I'll go ahead and get the exhaust manifold squared away. One nice thing is the doorman replacement manifold I picked up came with new nuts for the studs that put the cat to the manifold, and it also came with new bolts which hold the heat shield on. So that's a nice touch. Nothing too exciting here, I'll just get them snugged up. I'm going to get the O2 sensor in next. I got it out of the old manifold, got some copper anti-seize on there. You could wait and do this after you get the heat shield on, but I don't actually, for some reason, have a O2 sensor socket. So I have to use a wrench. And if I remember right, I got the I got the heat shield off without removing the O2 sensor on engine removal. So this should work out just fine. And again, just snug it down. Sort of running out of stuff I can do because I gotta get that starter in from the junkyard before I get the intake manifold on. But I figure I'll get the accessory belt on before I call it quits for today. This thing has a super simple belt, accessory belt routing, because it's only got the two accessories. It's got the alternator and the AC. The power steering is electric, and the water pump is driven by the timing chain, as we saw in the rebuild. I don't know how well it's going to show up, but it's just going to go around the crank pulley. Back side of the belt from the crank pulley is going to be on the tensioner here. And then it's just going to loop around both the AC and the alternator back onto the crank pulley. Should be pretty simple to get on. Alright, so what I've got going on here is I've got the belt looped around the crank pulley, the AC compressor, and the alternator. The tensioner has a 3/8 hole for a 3/8 ratchet. Right in the center, I'll try to throw a picture on the screen because it's kind of hard to show, and it's helpful if you're trying to do this. So what I'm going to do is put the ratchet in that hole, take the tension off, and the belt should just slip right over the tensioner.